Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to what is our 50th ZFA Conversation. My name is Bren Carlil, and I am the Director of Public Affairs at the Zionist Federation of Australia. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I speak, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Knowing that this conversation is being watched in every Australian state, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands on which people are watching this. Now, this week we are celebrating something incredible, the 75th anniversary of Israel's independence. We all have our favorite stories about Israel, our most cherished memory, the most incredible challenge it has overcome, our favorite Israeli accomplishment. Well, tonight we'll be discussing with Mark Regev his perspectives on what Israel has accomplished in the last 75 years, and we'll also be looking ahead. Now, Mark grew up in Australia before making Aliyah shortly after he finished university. He joined the ranks of Israel's foreign ministry and was posted in Hong Kong, Beijing, and Washington, DC, before ultimately becoming Israel's ambassador to the United Kingdom. Along the way, he did stints as the foreign ministries and then the Prime Minister's spokesperson for international affairs, as well as becoming the Prime Minister's foreign affairs advisor. Mark is now the chair of the Abba Eban Institute for Diplomacy and Foreign Relations at Reichman University, which, for those of you who don't know, used to be called the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya. And Mark also writes a weekly column for the Jerusalem Post on topics regarding global and Israeli politics. And it is my great pleasure to invite to our virtual stage, after a long absence, the ZFA CEO, Ginette Searle, who will be speaking with Mark this evening. Before I do invite Ginette to take the mic, just a reminder to post any questions that you have in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will see if we can address them as we go along. So now, without further ado, I'll hand you over to Ginette.
Thank you, Bren, and good evening, or rather good afternoon, Mark, Ambassador Mark Regev. And welcome to ZFA Conversations, and at least virtually to living rooms and to screens across Australia and beyond. And good evening to our audience. We'd love to hear your thoughts and questions throughout the discussion, so please feel free, as Bren said, to use the Q&A function in your Zoom function on your Zoom screen, and we'll try to get to as many of your points as we can as we have this conversation. Mark, you were born in Melbourne, as Bren said. You grew up here, you went to Mount Scopus. I'll fill in some of the really important things from our point of view that he didn't mention in your CV. You spent a year on a Shnut program for Habonim. You led in Habonim. You took leadership roles in August at Nugis, which I remember very well back in the day. And then you made Aliyah. I had cause to look in archives a number of years ago, and I saw your name in the record of minutes from State Zionist Council meetings too. So we really and truly think of you as one of your own, as a product of the Zionist movement of Australia, and we are so proud of all of your achievements, and we're so proud to be hosting you tonight, and welcome.
I'm happy to be with you.
And while these days you might be a visitor and a frequent regular visitor to Australia, you're still one of ours. So since making Aliyah, Mark, you haven't just been a participant, a member of the population, and in that way part of Israel's evolution and development, but you've been a key player in fields of diplomacy with an illustrious diplomatic career, being involved in politics and as an advisor in decision making. And today you're continuing to contribute to the discourse in your role at the Abba Eban Institute for Diplomacy and Public Affairs. So before we move on to some of the substantive issues that we're going to chat about tonight, can you just tell us a little bit about what you're doing today and what the Institute does and how it impacts on diplomacy and foreign affairs in Israel and outside of Israel?
Well, once again, I'm happy to be with you. It's a pleasure. It's fun. And I thank all those people who've decided to join us because they're giving up their free time on a Sunday, and it is appreciated. The Abba Eban Institute is one of a number of think tanks that sit in Reichman University. There are 3 think tanks which deal with the issues of national security. The most famous is probably Institute for Policy and Strategy, which does the annual Herzliya conference, which will be happening in May. There's another institute which deals with counterterrorism, which does every year around September 11th, a big counter-terrorist conference. And we are at the Abba Eban Institute, we deal with diplomacy. And so I like to joke with my colleagues in the other think tanks, you know, they're the ones that will decide when Israel attacks Iran, and we're the ones who will explain to the world why we've attacked Iran, yes? So we deal with more traditional diplomacy, but also in the framework of dealing with soft power, we're dealing with all sorts of new interesting things like how to, you know, social media and getting messages out and helping to train Israelis to make the case for Israel in a better way. We've got all sorts of different projects like that, which we're trying to do. We're a small team. We're only about 12 people at the Abba Eban Institute, but we try to say that we kick above our weight. We produce a journal in Hebrew and English, which is very well read. And we have all sorts of seminars and things. I can tell you, since the beginning of this year, I was in Abu Dhabi, in the Gulf, where we've got relations with a think tank there. I was in Romania, Bucharest, for a think tank dialogue there. We are always trying to engage with counterparts abroad. It's also part of making them aware of the national security dilemmas Israel deals with, but also we are more aware of how they look at us and how they see the Middle East and the changes going on and so forth.
Great. Sounds like a fantastic role, and I'm sure you're very well placed to lead that. So Mazal Tov on that role. I know it's not brand new, but that sounds really great. Tomorrow evening, as you know, of course, and Tuesday, we're commemorating Yom HaZikaron, and then Tuesday night, Wednesday, of course, Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel's 75th. Our communities, we hope, are going to be turning out in force across the country for commemorations and celebrations. Tonight, we want to explore a little bit, not only the significance of 75 years and the reasons to celebrate, but also do a little bit of a status report on Israel at 75. How's it going? Has it achieved what it set out to achieve so far? And a little bit of crystal ball gazing, and hear your ideas, please, on where you think Israel's going in the next few decades. So I'd like to start it from a bit of a personal perspective. You made Aliyah as a youth movement boger, full of ideology and idealism. Israel in 1982 probably looked very different from Israel today. And I'd like to ask you, Mark, at the time that you made Aliyah, what were your expectations of what Israel would be like 40 years or so hence in 2023? Did you think that's
difficult question to answer?
Yeah.
But I'll tell you a story.
Right.
When I was the Israeli ambassador in London, excuse me, when I was the Israeli ambassador in London, I had a good friend who was a senior Foreign Office official, and he was what we would call a Foreign Office Arabist. Yes, he'd served at different Israeli embassies across the region, different British embassies across the region, and he knew his stuff very well. And though he wasn't a natural friend of Israel, because he came from a background which was more dealing with the Arab world, he knew his stuff very well, and we had some very, very good conversations. And once over, I think it was a breakfast or something, and we were talking more casually, he said to me the first time he visited Tel Aviv was in the early 1980s, which is when I made Aliyah, more or less. And he said, I thought Tel Aviv was Bucharest plus. I just spoke about Bucharest a moment ago. When I talk about Bucharest, I should say in English, the capital of Romania. He said, Romania plus. And he says, now when he comes to Tel Aviv, he sees this great, vibrant, international city. And maybe that's the change in Israel over the last 40 years, right? That Israel has become much more affluent, much more successful, much larger, much stronger, much more a player on the world stage. And I think that's something that's the obvious change. When he says Tel Aviv used to be Bucharest plus, and today Tel Aviv is this amazing international city. And I think that consummates encapsulates the changes going on here. I remember as a teenager at Mount Scopus, I remember the period of the Yom Kippur War, and maybe some of the people my age who are on this conversation can remember this time. And also I remember it was a very difficult period for Israel, and it was a very difficult period for Jewish communities abroad. And everyone said, look, Israel is facing these terrible challenges. You know, our neighbors don't want to make peace with us. There's war after war, and the Israeli soldiers have to pay the price, as we'll mark tomorrow in Israel with Yom HaZikaron, yes? And there's no end in sight to this hostility from our neighbors. And added to that, and people who remember the 1970s will recall that the Arabs had the oil weapon, yes? And they placed an oil embargo on countries that weren't, you know, as strongly pro-Arab in their way they voted at the UN, in the way they talked about the Middle East, in the way they had relations with Israel. In other words, they could enforce support for their Arab positions internationally because people needed the oil. Yeah. And I remember thinking as a teenager, Israel we're really outgunned. We might be able to win on the battlefield, but internationally, the Arabs have this unique weapon that they can use, the oil weapon, to galvanize international support for their positions. And as you know better than most, Ginette, there was the whole thing with Zionism is racism at the UN, and terrible things were happening. Now, fast forward today, 40 years, you know, beyond. I mean, first of all, Israel's made peace with the countries not all of them, not with Syria, obviously, but we made peace with Egypt and Jordan, both of whom we fought in Yom Kippur War. People forget that the Jordanians sent armored divisions to the Golan Heights to fight us also in 1973. And so that's a huge revolution. The fact that we've made peace with people who we previously were in, you know, terrible conflict with. And secondly, if we talk about oil, right, the Arabs had this commodity that the whole world needed, and because the whole world needed the economy, they could demand support for their positions. Maybe today in the 21st century, it's not that we've got oil, we've got some, you know, offshore gas in the Mediterranean, which is also interesting. But maybe Israel's technological boom, oil of the 21st century, maybe that it gives Israel clout that we never used to have before. And if I look at countries like Japan and South Korea, who are, you know, in the Arab-Israel conflict, they were always outsiders, but they now want to get close to Israel. Why do they want to get close to Israel? Technology. And so I think in many ways you could argue that Israel is uniquely positioned to succeed in the 21st century. And if you ask your larger philosophical question, and where are we going to go in this next 75 years? I think that the trajectory is looking very positive.
Great. You've just answered like 5 of my questions, so thank you. So you talked a bit about the challenges of previous decades. Okay, you talked about the challenges that were overcome, I guess, in creating this new paradigm, I suppose, in evolving from the old Tel Aviv to the new Tel Aviv, if you like. What are the challenges going forward? You've talked a bit about where we're positioned and how we're positioned on this upwards trajectory, but what do you see as the major challenges going forward in the coming decades?
Well, there are external and internal, okay? So externally, there's the good news that the Arab world is increasingly open to Israel more than ever before, okay? And the fact that we have now, if there are 20 members of the Arab League, we're talking to more than half of them today. And with the whole group, we've got formal diplomatic relations: Israel, Jordan, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Morocco. And as I say, there's another half a dozen who we talk to unofficially, but not officially. And that's a major breakthrough. At the same time, we've still got people out there who don't want us to be here. We've got enemies. And you can't be like the ostrich, you know, putting your head in the sand and ignore the threats, just as you shouldn't ignore the opportunities. And there are opportunities to make peace. And I think we'll see the further expanding of the circle of peace. I've got no doubt about that.
I want to ask you a bit more about that.
Okay. But just as we want to seize opportunities, it's important to be realistic about the threats. And the threats are there. We saw that over Pesach when we had missiles from Gaza, from Lebanon, and from Syria shot into Israel. And at the same time, you had violence in Jerusalem and in the West Bank. And all these threats came out at once. And the defense minister said just 2-3 days ago, he said publicly, he said maybe Israel has to get used to the idea that in our next confrontation with the Arab world, which unfortunately is inevitable, it's just a matter of time. We hope it won't be soon. We hope it won't be long. We hope it won't be particularly, having a toll in blood, but we know it'll happen. We can't presume it'll only be in the south or only be in the north. We maybe should get used to the idea that it could be a combined. Maybe Passover was an wake-up call that next time Israel has to fight, it might have to fight on numerous fronts at the same time. And we have to be aware of the threats. The biggest threat, of course, is coming from Iran. And Iran is in Iran, but Iran is also in Syria and Lebanon and Iraq and Yemen. And they have the ability to attack us and to hurt us. And we have to be very, very strong, and we have to be very calculated in how we respond to these challenges. And I think we are being. I think the Iranians are playing defense, but we have to make sure that they understand that any attack on Israel ultimately hurts them much more than it hurts us. That's deterrence.
Right.
You talked also about the internal challenges that we face, domestic things, which we've seen come to the fore in all this debate about judicial reform in Israel. And we saw these cleavages in Israeli society coming to the forefront. And these are issues which I think need to be discussed. We don't talk enough about Israel's Arab minority. 20% of Israelis are Arabs. And how do we integrate them better into Israeli society? How do we make them part of the Israeli success story? There's no doubt that Israeli Arabs have been, mobile on the socioeconomic ladder. They've been moving up. They've been moving up in their educational ladder and so forth. But more needs to be done, and we have to see how we can better integrate Israeli Arabs into the society. Ultimately, just from a purely economic point of view, you have a resource that's not being used fully, and so it's a waste. We need to see Arab Israelis integrated better into society, into the economy, into education, into high tech, and more needs to be done then. And then there's the whole question of the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox. How do they become more integrated into society? And obviously, the issue of their not doing army service came up again this week with proposals to find compromises and so forth. But that's a difficult issue. But it's a one issue in a larger pie, which talks about to what extent are they integrated into the economy and so forth. To what extent are they a productive part of society? And then you have all sorts of issues like what are we teaching or what are they learning in their schools? Are their young people learning skills that make it possible for them to become integrated into a 21st century economy or not? And that's also a growing population in Israel, the ultra-Orthodox. So how do we deal with those issues? I think they are the sort of issues that we have to deal with as we move forward to make sure that, Israel will continue to be a success story, but we don't want to see people left behind.
Yeah.
And we want to say an Israeli society where everyone can feel that they're part of this success that we have in Israel.
So a question from the audience already we have, do Israel's internal challenges, such as the ones you've talked about already, and we will talk a little bit more about what's going on with the protests, to what extent do they impact on the external challenges that Israel faces?
So there's a debate about that now. To what extent did the violence we see over Pesach, was that a function of Arabs thinking, or our enemies thinking, that Israel is divided and they've lost their, they're not focused on what they need to focus on, and it's an opportunity to hit them, yes?
Yeah.
I'd be very skeptical, though, about that. If you look at the protesters against the judicial reform, they're marching with all these Israeli flags, right? They're Israeli patriots. And the idea that, that somehow this makes us less unified in our desire to defend ourselves, I don't think is true. And maybe they see it through the eyes of their societies, right? The protesters in Iran want to bring the rule of the Ayatollahs there, right? It's and they don't have a democratic vote like we have in Israel. So I don't think it's the same, but they probably see it more through their eyes, and they see maybe what they see as a lack of social cohesion or protest, polarization. They see that as a weakness. You could argue And in fact, Moody's, the international credit rating agency, they said that Israeli civil society and the activism and the strength of Israeli civil society that was seen over the last few weeks, Moody's said that's actually a sign of Israeli strength and not weakness. Maybe that's difficult for our enemies to understand, though.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and you mentioned this in one of your articles recently, the ubiquitousness of the Israeli flag. And I think the protests around the world that have been mounted, whether it's in the United States or Australia, you still see the Israeli flag as the sort of unifying symbol. So in all of this division, and I don't want to whitewash it and sprinkle fairy dust and say it's not terrible, but in all of this, there is a unifying motif there, and people are doing it for the sake of Israeli democracy, for the sake of the Declaration of Independence. I think that's a really important thing for people to remember. It's easy for us not so. I guess that's part of what you do, is to communicate that outside as well. People have talked about the internal tensions that Israel's facing at the moment, the internal crisis, if you like, comparing that to the 1990s. Would you say that there's a comparison there? Is it similar or is it different?
Obviously, there are similarities and there are also differences. I mean, we've had tough times in the past where Israelis have been divided. I came in Aliyah at the beginning of 1982, and we had the Lebanon War that year. And anyone who was in Israel during those years will remember a high degree of polarization and protests and people saying very, very strong words against the then Prime Minister Menachem Begin and Defense Minister at the time, Ariel Sharon. That was a time of great, social tension. There was even, we haven't had it, and I hope it doesn't happen, but there was even a Peace Now demonstrator who was murdered. Someone threw a bomb at a bunch of, demonstrators in Jerusalem. So that was a difficult period. And then I remember, if you want to fast forward, you can go to the decision of Ariel Sharon to pull out of Gaza. And we saw massive demonstrations across the entire country, people who disagreed with that, yes? So what we're going through today is not unprecedented, though there are obviously new things that we haven't seen before. I mean, Israel has always been a democracy. I mean, if we want to go back in history, in the early 1950s, Ben-Gurion's decision, Israel's first prime minister, to do a reparations agreement with Germany, that was hugely controversial. And then Menachem Begin, who was opposition leader, organized these massive demonstrations outside the Knesset, some of them turning violent. So I think we do have a tradition of Israel of dealing with, polarized issues that divide people, very emotional issues. So what we're going through now, I mean, you could see it in the context of, one of those issues that has divided Israelis, though when you're in the middle of it, as we are at the moment, it's sometimes difficult to have any sort of historic perspective.
Yeah. It's also an interesting time to be discussing this, because we are on the cusp of a significant, we measure milestones in quarters of decades, if you like, or quarters of centuries. And it's the 75th, it's 3/4 of a century. It's a big number. And here we are on the cusp of Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut with people pleading to others, don't protest, don't violate the sanctity of Yom HaZikaron. Others saying, bereaved families saying, please, to politicians, please don't come to our ceremonies. What do you make of this? Is this unprecedented? Is this something new to worry about?
So first of all, it's not unprecedented. Just last year, when Naftali Bennett was prime minister, at a memorial protest, at a memorial ceremony, yes, on Yom HaZikaron, people from the right protested against him and disrupted a ceremony. I think it's disgusting. They shouldn't have done it, and I don't think they should do it now, from the right, from the left, no one. I think we should respect the families of the bereaved and keep politics out of it. I have a member of my team here who wrote a piece that was published this morning in Ma'ariv. He lost his brother in military service, and he wrote a piece, and he openly supports the protesters. He says, if the protesters disrupt Yom HaZikaron services, they'll be doing their cause harm. They shouldn't do it. They'll turn the Israeli public against them. People don't want to see this sort of thing, right? And I think, the Yom HaZikaron is one of the issues where the Israelis unite behind, and it's all about the families of the bereaved and telling the stories of the young men and women who were killed during their service. So I don't expect Yom HaZikaron to get out of hand. I think there is a sort of feeling in the country that there are some things that shouldn't be touched, that shouldn't be politicized. You note, and I'm sure you've seen it, Ginette, there was a joint letter signed by the Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Gallant, and the two leaders of the two larger opposition parties, Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz, and all saying, keep the politics out of Yom HaZikaron. As to whether politicians, and it was the second part of your question, should go to the different cemeteries, I actually personally think they should. And I'll tell you why. When you're in the Israeli government, you have to make a lot of very, very important decisions, right? And so sometimes you're deciding on, what to do about the teachers' wages, and sometimes you're talking about environmental issues. But you also, unfortunately, in the Israeli government have to deal all too often with matters of life and death. Do you send the IDF into Gaza? How do you respond to this? And so forth and so on. And I think it's very important that elected officials, members of Knesset and obviously members of the government, they go to these ceremonies. They have to look the bereaved families in the eye. They have to know that the responsibility is of their shoulder. And the whole idea of telling the elected officials, we don't want to see you at these sort of ceremonies, I think is not good. I think they need to be there. I think it's crucial that they experience that day in Israel, close up, firsthand, how the bereaved families are dealing with their tragedy and understand the consequences of their decisions.
Yeah, ultimately it's national, but it's also so very personal, isn't it? And so very painful. What about Yom Ha'atzmaut? What's it going to mean for the 75th, which should, by all accounts, be an unmitigated celebration? Is what's going on at the moment going to affect that, in your opinion?
So because of the internal climate that has been not particularly good, so that's cast a shadow of what you said should be an unmitigated celebration, yes? And so I think most Israelis today will say, if we can get through this, okay, that's the main thing, right? And so I think Yom Ha'atzmaut brings people together. Yom Ha'atzmaut, people get together with friends and family. I know at my house, apparently, we're hosting like 40 people at some big barbecue that I'm supposed to be working hard, turning steaks upside down, yes? And we're not out of the norm. Israelis get together and they celebrate with families and friends. It's a big day, Yom Ha'atzmaut in Israel. And there are all the ceremonies and people are having fun. That'll happen. But you are right, I think, to a certain extent. I think it would have been a different national mood if we hadn't had this political crisis in Israel over the last couple of weeks. It was very good, I think, that the Prime Minister decided to put all the judicial issue on hold. And that sort of allowed us maybe more to enjoy Pesach and to commemorate Yom HaShoah and Yom HaZikaron and then Yom Ha'atzmaut. And that sort of gave us a breathing space. But, the internal situation in Israel has been down, and that is affecting this holiday. And as I said, if in the past, if you were planning a year ago, you said, look, how are we going to celebrate 75 years? I think today people would be happy to say, let's just make sure everything goes well. Yeah, which maybe is sad. It should have been an occasion that was, talked about and in a very upbeat way. And the truth is, when I was working for government, there was always a thing you'd say politicians, like the Prime Minister has to deal with, what's urgent and not necessarily what's important. This whole issue of judicial reform is crucial, right? It has to be discussed in that.
Yeah.
But in a historic perspective of decades, right? If you look at where Israel was 75 years ago, when Ben Gurion, the day the British left on the 14th of May, 1945, yes? And where we are today, right? By any objective criteria, Israel is an amazing success story. You just look at any criteria, whether it's demographically, then we were 600,000. Today, we're close to 10 million. Then we were a poor, undeveloped country. When the new immigrants came, people were living in tents and there wasn't work for them. And then we had rationing. And today our GDP per capita is higher than Australia's, believe it or not, right? There are, and that if we were once, people said Israel, won't survive. There are too many, it has too many enemies. And they both quantitatively and qualitatively, they outmatch the Jewish state. Well, that's obviously not true, right? There's so much we can be thankful for. And it is to a certain extent a pity that the recent political crises in Israel have cast a shadow on what should have been a great national celebration.
Absolutely. There's a couple of questions coming through the chat that relate to what you've just been talking about. I have to say, I think there's 14 people in the audience who want to be sitting in my chair right now and asking questions, because the questions are flying in. And thank you, everybody. But a couple of questions are asking about demographics. Tel Aviv, which is very secular, internal problems between secular and Haredim. How can Israel bridge that divide? Is this going to be Israel's biggest challenge moving forward? You mentioned something about that before, but there's more questions coming through on that. So would you like to elaborate?
So I'll tell you a funny story. When I was ambassador in the UK, he doesn't have commercials, but the other networks did. And if I was watching one of the other networks on a rare occasion, I would see these ads like at 10 o'clock at night, and they'd have these ads put out by the Israeli Tourist Bureau. And it was something I remember, it went like this. It was like, 2 cities, 2 experiences, and they'd have Tel Aviv, and they'd show people dancing on the beach and having fun and going to bars and so forth. And then they'd show Jerusalem archaeology and prayer and history and so forth. And so I made a joke. I said, it's like they're selling Holy City and Sin City, right? That's how they're selling Israel, right? And it's true. Israel is both. And we have our past, and we have the present, and we have our future. It's all very, how do we live together? This is a tough one, right? Obviously in their private lives, right? How everyone makes their own choices, how they want there to live, how they want to raise their children, and so forth. What you do in the public space can often be a bone of contention, right? I'll give you an example from where I am now, from the academic world, okay?
Yeah.
In order to get the ultra-Orthodox into the workforce, some of the universities around Israel have proposed, and they have these programs for the ultra-Orthodox, teach them English, teach them math, teach them engineering, right? So they can move into the workforce and become good breadwinners for their families and good for the country's GDP, right? But to do this, the universities had to agree that these are male-only classes. And there was a backlash. People said, well, that's against academic freedom. What's the other one? Universities are going to have segregation in their classes. And that's when you get these issues in the public space. To what extent? Now, what is more important? The idea that there can never be segregation in education, that's terrible at a university? Or is it terrible to say, we've got an opportunity to take people and move them into the workforce, right? These are the sort of issues where maybe there isn't a black and white answer. You've got to deal with the issue as it is, but these are the sort of issues across Israeli society. Many years ago, when I did basic training for the Israeli army, so there was a platoon of religious soldiers next to the platoon next to us, and we had a PE instructor, and she used to come in her short pants and tight shirt, and they had a female, admittedly female, but she always dressed very modestly, and that was, now, can the army tell a woman to dress modestly because she's dealing with religious? Well, then the army said yes. And these are all compromises. How you deal with these situations is not easy, but we've got to find a way to live and let live in Israel, right? That's the bottom line.
Okay. Just going back to the idea of 75, this is something, Naftali Bennett was here earlier this year, and he mentioned the fact that there have been 3 periods in history where Israel's been a sovereign state. And we're in the 3rd time now, obviously. But in the first 2 times, after 75 or 80 years, we lost sovereignty, and ultimately it was lost because of internal strife, internal conflict, more than external pressure. Before we move off this whole idea of the 75th and move on to something a little bit more positive and then something a little bit more strategic, what do you think that we're looking down the barrel of that scenario today? We're hitting 75, we're looking at internal crisis right now as we hit 75. Is this in any way similar to periods gone by? or is there something fundamentally different?
So I'm not an expert on antiquity, so I really can't, unlike Naftali Bennett, talk about what happened, at the time of the ancient kingdoms of Israel. It's not my field of expertise. Maybe I should take a course here at the university about it, right? But my feeling is we've seen some things that are uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
That I don't like over the last couple of weeks. I didn't like the way some reservists used their army service as a vehicle to put pressure on the government. I didn't agree with that. I think that's very dangerous. When soldiers decide policy, that's in a military dictatorship. Used to have across Latin America, used to have military juntas. Yes, yeah. Well, in a democracy, soldiers are supposed to, stay out of politics. Of course, everyone's a citizen. They can vote the way they want. They are obviously, it's like you had, high-tech people against the reforms, doctors against, everyone had their lines, so they had soldiers against the reforms. But I think there are some red lines that is very dangerous. And I always, when I say this, it's like, are we going to have units in the army that agree to take down an illegal settlement, and other units in the army that, don't go because they're against the judicial reform, or, what? It's like, you can't do it, not in a democracy. In a democracy, the army has to be about politics. And I think people here, I think there actually has been, since those things started like 3-4 weeks ago, there has been blowback. And I think a lot of the people involved have started to rethink some of the things that they said publicly, because there are some things that you just got to avoid doing. That bothered me, right?
Right.
That bothered me. But obviously Israel we always had a strong democratic tradition and people speak their minds. But I think there has to be some sort of, parameters that people understand that this is dangerous if you cross them, right? I mean, at the time of the pullout from Gaza, which is not the same, it's different, but it was a time of controversy in Israel. So there's a big thing, how are like religious soldiers in the army who are committed to settling the land of Israel, how are they supposed to respond? Everyone said, no, when you're a soldier, you do what the government has decided. There's a democratically elected government, right? And it makes policy, you don't. And so I think that applies today as well when it's on the other shoe, so to speak. I think that's crucial. So we've seen that, right? I think I have to tell you personally, I don't like it. And if it's wrong or right, you can decide, Ginette. But I don't like it when people people are saying, well, all the international money is going to leave Israel and people won't come here and invest anymore and so forth and so on. And when you can create a self-fulfilling prophecy by talking down the country, right? And who's that good for? Yeah. I mean, my late father used to joke, communists always wanted things to get bad because then they can take power, yeah? I don't want anyone in Israel to think, well, we've got to make things really bad and then, we'll take power or something. That's not good. That's not Zionist. That's not democratic, right?
Right. Right. So we've talked a bit about some of the challenges facing Israel as it reaches its 75th anniversary milestone. And you've talked about, in meta terms, some of the accomplishments and the transition to, the new Tel Aviv, if you like, as you put it. But of all Israel's accomplishments, what has been your favourite in the last 75 years?
So it's not something I can smile about, but it's something I believe is very, very important, right? And that is the Jewish people, because of Israel, now can look after themselves. I wrote a piece last week for the Jerusalem Post for Yom HaShoah, where I spoke about that even, Roosevelt and Churchill, who instrumental in defeating Nazi Germany, great leaders, right? Saved the world from Hitler. Saving the Jews was not a priority for them. They could have done much more and they chose not to. They were focused on other issues, not because they're anti-Semitic, it's just it wasn't a high priority enough for them. I wrote in the piece that there were numerous flights by the American Air Force in 1944 over the vicinity of Auschwitz-Birkenau, and no one thought, well, maybe we should bomb the camps to stop the mass murder. And so the fact today is that you have a Jewish state that can put Jewish priorities first that the Jewish people are no longer defenseless, that the Jewish people are no longer stateless. If you read international literature on refugees, so a lot of it starts in the 1930s and talks about Jewish refugees, right? And refugees from Germany and then Austria and then Czechoslovakia, right? There are no Jewish refugees today because we have an Israel, right? And it says in our constitution, it says in our Declaration of Independence, it says any Jew has the right. It's not that they have, an option. They have a right in Israeli law to come to Israel and they get citizenship, right? And I think that transformation in the life of the Jewish people, that's for me is the most important thing. That the Jews today can defend themselves by themselves. Of course, we need friends abroad. Of course, we need allies. We're a normal country like everyone else, yes. But the fact that from a state of almost, you could say, national impotence, where we're begging other people to protect us, right? This idea that Jews can protect themselves, that's a big deal. I think it's crucial.
Yeah, it's a huge accomplishment. I'd like to touch briefly, you alluded to it a little bit ago, on diaspora-Israel relationship. And I think your experience both in the US and the UK, in the whole diplomatic sphere, puts you in, I'd be very interested in your view. I just this afternoon actually read that the Prime Minister cancelled his address at the Jewish Federations of North America General Assembly, and that some of the participants there were actually happy that he did so, which I find terrible. I find shocking that Zionists, active Zionists from their community, representing their communities, come to Israel and don't welcome the Prime Minister. What is going on with the Israel diaspora relationship? What's your take on the current health of the relationship?
So I know in my own family as well, you get different opinions on all sorts of different issues. And you can't expect, if Israelis have different opinions on these issues, you can't expect diaspora Jews not to have different opinions also, right? Just as you could have a whole kaleidoscope of opinion in Israel, you can get a whole kaleidoscope of opinion in the Australian Jewish community, right? Mm. And that's legitimate. I would always, though, add two caveats. The first is that Israel's a democracy. It'll stay that way. And that I think people living abroad should respect the democratic processes in Israel, okay? And if they don't agree with the way the Israeli people voted, at least they should, instead of dismissing them, they're all just stupid, the Israelis, yeah? They should try to understand, why did the majority of Israelis vote this way? What were the reasons, right? I think at least there should be a respect for the democratic will of the Israeli people. And secondly, I remember I experienced this firsthand in London. You've got Jews who feel very strongly about Israel, and they might be critical of this or that government policy, but I would urge them always to be careful not to play into the hands of Israel's enemies, of the people who are the automatic anti-Israel group. And here they can say, oh, look at these people. They agree with us. You don't agree with them. They're not friends of Israel, these people, yeah? And so it's important, I think, to be politically, how do you avoid a situation where a well-meaning Jewish group can play into the hands of a group that has no positive agenda whatsoever when it comes to Israel? And it's not easy sometimes. We have to, you have to find the right way to navigate that. But I think that also has to be something like, I spoke before about the British Foreign Office, which was traditionally not a great friend of Israel. Yes, it was full of Sir Humphreys who were Arabists. Yes, and from their point of view, Britain should have, should never have issued the Balfour Declaration, and its real interests are with the Arab world and so forth. So if a Jewish group gives them something that makes them stronger, is that really something the Jewish group wants to happen, right? I would argue, you've got to think about the politics of what you're doing and its ramifications.
Mark, I'm going to switch us now to some of the questions that have come in from the audience, because we've had a barrage of questions. A couple have been in relation to Hasbara, and basically asking about where are we at with Hasbara, with all the wonderful achievements, PR isn't great. What can we do about it? It sounds like you've got this is what you're doing on a day-to-day basis at the Abba Eban Institute. There's a few questions around Hasbara. Would you like to elaborate on that?
Look, Israelis and diaspora Jews always complain that the Hasbara isn't good enough. That's a given, okay? That's part of life. And I think Israel can do a better job and should do a better job at getting its message out. And I did, it was my job for a couple of years to be in charge of the Israeli message and making Israel's case abroad. And now the other people are doing it. And at the Abba Eban Institute, as you correctly said, we're training the IDF, we're working with the foreign ministry, we're working with other people to help make sure that there's another generation of Israeli spokespeople who can make the case. And we need more women, and we need more people from ethnic minority communities. Israel's a diverse society. You can't just have old Ashkenazi men like myself speaking for Israel. You've got to have the whole width of Israeli society out there. And these are the sort of things we're working on. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, continue.
No, I was going to say but people have to understand something when we talk about Hasbara. We can do more, we can do a better job. I've got no doubt about that. But, anti-Semites believe Jews control the media, yes? The Jews are writing the editorials and what we're watching on TV and so forth. A secret, Ginette, it's just not true. We don't control the media.
We wish, right?
And so the media is not going to write whatever we want, and the ABC is not going to report what we want them to report, right? And that's the bottom line. I remember, though, when I was dealing with the job and a new journalist came to Israel and I'd take them out for lunch, I'd always say the following, and this people should remember, especially now with what's happened in Israel the last few weeks. Israel is there every day because we are a democratic society. We're every day, warts and all, in all our imperfection for everyone to see, yeah? And if you walk down the street in Israel with an ABC camera and you ask people what they think of the prime minister, you'll get 12 different answers, yeah? And that's the way Israelis are. We're opinionated and we speak freely. We live in an open society, correct? Yep. And the Israeli who says the most extreme thing, he's the one that they'll probably show on ABC News that night, correct? It's not the same on the Arab side. I mean, if you walk down Gaza with the camera and you ask people what they think about Hamas, yeah? What are people's ability to say, it's like, walking down the street in Cuba, did you like Mr. Castro? Or walking down the street, what's an Asian dictatorship in North Korea, and say, what do you think about Mr. Kim? Is he a good president? What are people, excuse me, what are people going to say?
Yeah, of course.
And you don't have like a lot of the bad stories. I used to joke when I was in London, a lot of the more critical stories about Israel in The Guardian, where were they first published? In the Israeli media, right? And you have nothing comparable on the Arab side where you have an independent Arab media that's looking right and so forth. And so just people should understand that Israel is out there every day in all our glorious imperfection. And the other side has the ability to more control the message because they're dictatorial societies and no independent media. Even a group, let's say, I get these reports during the Gaza war, the Palestinian Red Crescent in Gaza has reported, and maybe someone in Perth thinks, oh, the Palestinian Red Crescent, that's like the Red Cross, right? But no, the Palestinian Red Crescent was like the Soviet Red Cross when there was a Soviet Union. Yes, it's part of a state mechanism. They don't have independent opinions. It's not independent civil society. And obviously, when you cover a society, when you report from a society that's not democratic, right, it's more difficult. And it's not as easy as walking down the street in Tel Aviv and putting microphones in front of people's faces to get opinions. I always used to joke, I had this story, that you had, let's say the IDF, the Israeli Air Force, attacks some target in Gaza. And the next day, journalists show up and say, what happened here? And everyone says, no, we're just farmers, right? We were peacefully farming our land, and one day the IDF came and bombed us for no reason. And guess what? If you bomb for no reason, that's a war crime, right? That's wrong. You shouldn't do it. We should be criticized if we do it. Now, maybe we did make a mistake, or maybe or maybe, the farmers didn't want to say that there was Hamas in their area. Because when the journalist goes back to Jerusalem that night and files his or her report, who do the farmers have to live with?
Yeah.
Who runs, where do their kids go to school? In other words, the fact that those farmers would face violent retribution from Hamas, that's a factor. And yet in the stories, it's often mixed.
I need to jump to another topic because there are so many questions on it. People are asking about the conflict with the Palestinians, if they'd like your opinion on that, particularly if I can summarize a few of the questions, and apologies to those asking if I'm squashing it all together. But diplomacy-wise, it's getting harder to sell the occupation. The two-state solution, there's actually just argument on the chat on whether the two-state solution is possible, impossible. One state's no good, two states not going to work, but can the status quo last forever? What do you think, Mark? Where are we going there?
So I'll give you a path forward, okay? You don't have to agree with me, but I'll give you my path forward. I think for the time being, the best you could do on the Palestinian track is damage control. In other words, the best thing you can do is try to keep things quiet, try to keep things peaceful, work on economic issues. Maybe that can also help you achieve stability. But in the short term, I don't see a breakthrough on the Palestinian track for all sorts of reasons, because of Hamas in Gaza and Hamas in the West Bank, which is, breathing down the neck of Fatah. Fatah is dysfunctional. Abu Mazen, I wrote about this as well. President Abbas has been there now for 20 years almost, and he was elected to a 4-year term. And I talked about a process of Brezhnevization on the Palestinian territory, where an aged autocrat just brings stagnation to a political process. So I don't have a lot of optimism on the Palestinian track in the short term. Means we have to act responsibly, we have to act prudently, we have to try to, as I say, to lower the flames and keep things as quiet as possible and try to make life better for them. That's also fighting, can help fight extremism maybe, in other words, but it's more conflict management. I don't believe that anytime soon, I'd like to be wrong, yes, but I don't believe anytime soon we can see a breakthrough on the Palestinian track. But what we had with the Abraham Accords, which showed that large parts of the Arab and Muslim world are open to move forward with Israel. And what happened with the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco, that can happen with other Arab countries too. And I think that's where the focus should be today, because ultimately that will come back and affect the Palestinians. Because as Israel's relations with the Arab world become stronger, as we have wider contacts, as we have more trade and more tourism and stronger government connections, right? And we have more cooperation. The Arab world is for the Palestinians, that's their family. That's their reference group. Like if you are European, you look at other European countries to be your reference group. If you're Canadian, you look at Australia and the United States and Great Britain, that's your reference group, right?
Yeah.
Their reference group is the Arab world, which they're proudly a member of. Yes, they're proudly Arabs. And so as the Arab world becomes more open and more accepting of Israel, as Israel is increasingly seen as the legitimate part of the region, I think that has to blow back and hit the Palestinians too. And that has to deal with some of their more extremist now. That as the Abraham Accords, they're good in themselves because we get more relations with more Arab countries, and that's a great thing. I mean, when Australians now travel to Israel, they already feel the difference, right?
Yeah, sure.
You feel the difference. We can fly over Arab airspace on the way to Israel. You can fly El Al over Arab airspace. We've got all these good things happening, right?
Stop over in Dubai.
You probably know more about this than me than anyone else, Ginette. Definitely more than me. That if El Al starts a direct flight to Melbourne, which they're talking about, I don't know if it's going to happen soon.
It has been for a while, yeah.
Yeah. But that's precisely because Israelis now can fly over Arab airspace, right? There's huge changes, very important changes. Yeah. And so the Abraham Accords are in themselves good, in themselves historic, and in themselves very, very positive. But ultimately, they will blow back and affect Palestinian opinion. And as the Arab world is more accepting of Israel, Palestinians will become, and that'll help them make the compromises that we need to make for there to be peace.
I noticed that in this last week, there's a new embassy opened in Turkmenistan, which is a lovely Yom Ha'atzmaut present, I guess, 19 kilometers from Iran. All the headlines are showing. It's very cool.
Yeah.
In terms of the Abraham Accords, who's next? Which countries are next? What do you reckon?
I don't know, and I'll probably be surprised. But there are obviously candidates in the Gulf. Saudi Arabia is the really big prize. If Saudi Arabia excuse me, would normalize ties with Israel, that'd be a revolution, yeah, because Saudi Arabia has a special status both in the Arab world and in the Islamic world because of its custodian of the holy places. So I'm not sure how quickly that will happen. US relations with Saudi Arabia have not been good, and for all sorts of reasons. I hope it will happen soon, but it'll happen. I just don't have a timeline for it. So who will be next? Then there's always, in your part of the world, the Muslim countries of Asia.
Yeah.
And Malaysia, probably impossible. Indonesia, I don't know. Bangladesh, other places, actually, we've had some movement in Africa with Muslim countries in Africa, Muslim majority countries, yes. And so I think we should be looking and exploring them all. Who will be the next to move and how quickly it will happen? I don't have an answer. All I know is this, and I think we can be optimistic about this, Ginette, that the trajectory is clear. Yeah, more and more Arab countries will be making peace with Israel, will be normalizing their ties with Israel. I have no doubt about that.
And that, after 75 years, is an incredible achievement. Who would have thought that back in 1948, really?
Correct.
Which we've come to the end of our allotted time. I want to finish with one question. I'm going to take you back to the personal thing, back to being an Oleh. Somebody asked, do you still feel like an Oleh 40 years later? They say that Olim are always Olim. And I'm going to ask you in the context of having represented Israel in so many different places. And I'm going to ask it in a way, it's a little bit cheeky. It's Anzac Day also on Tuesday, not only Yom HaZikaron, but Anzac Day. And you know that Yom HaZikaron and Anzac Day, while they both memorialize, are commemorated in very different ways. Here we have the Essendon-Collingwood football match. And of course, that would never happen in Israel. But there is the Anzac Day 40 match happening in Beersheba. And I want to know if you're going to be following it. How Aussie really are you still?
So we have a ceremony here at the university, which I might attend. And then in the evening, we have in the community I live in Israel, we have a ceremony, and I'll be going to those. Okay. And then they always have very interesting television on the night of Yom HaZikaron, because they deal with families and soldiers, and you always learn something new.
Yeah, of course.
And so that's usually the way I do Yom HaZikaron. I've got a friend who was with me in Habonim, Australia. We met just on the weekend. He told me that he often spends his Yom HaZikaron going to the graves of people who he knew who were killed in the first Lebanon war. That's my generation, yeah?
Yeah.
I missed out. I went into the army in 83 because I only made Aliyah in 82. But the people who were in the army in 82, I know, went through a very difficult time. And so that's more my Yom HaZikaron. It's definitely not an Anzac Day experience.
No.
Okay.
But the Anzac Day thing is not happening. I just want to make it clear. It's not happening on Yom HaZikaron. It's happening on the 29th. So it's
All right,
still
very good. That sounds more appropriate.
much more appropriate. Okay.
Yeah.
Bren, I'm going to hand it back to you. Mark, thank you so much. I think we didn't even touch on a percentage of the questions that were coming from the audience or what was on my list, but thank you so much for your openness and your intelligent answers, and really for sharing so much tonight. Bren, back to you.
My pleasure. Happy to be with you.
Thank you, Ginette. Thank you, Mark. Look, yeah, Mark, as Ginette was saying, there's quite a few times I wanted to wrest control of the conversation from Ginette because there were so many questions that I could have asked, but be that as it may, that was a fantastic conversation, which really, as Ginette said, only just scratched the surface. So thank you so much for your time tonight, Ginette. Thank you so much for having this conversation, and for everyone else. Have a wonderful week this week. It is a really meaningful week, both Yom HaZikaron, Yom Ha'atzmaut. No matter where you are in Australia, there will be Yom Ha'atzmaut parties happening. In Israel, obviously. I'm looking forward to going to Perth to celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut over there. Have a great week, and there you go. Thanks again, Mark.